Yeah.
Okay.
And then.
Okay, you guys are all set.
Awesome. All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Gabrielle Markle. I'm a staff attorney at the Center for Elder Law and Justice. Welcome to our presentation today on elder abuse and financial exploitation and some of the warning signs that go along with those two things. So I'm here today with my colleague, Amanda. Take it away.
My name is Amanda Chase. I'm a social worker at the Center for Elder Law and Justice. And we're going to start right out with some statistics on older America. So in 2015, there were approximately 47.8 million Americans aged 65 and over. The expansion of our country's aging population, coupled with the growing occurrences of elder abuse, produced the need to both inspect and enhance the systems that are currently in place to help older adults recovery from maltreatment. It's estimated that 1 in 15 to 1 in 24 cases of elder abuse are reported. Some estimates range into the millions of older adults being abused yearly. Elder abuse is an extremely serious crime that's perpetrated against some of our country's most vulnerable citizens. In New York State, the statistics are staggering. It's estimated that 260,000 older adults in New York State experience some form of elder abuse every year. That's out of 1,000 older New Yorkers, 141 of them have experienced elder abuse in some form. Approximately 90% of people who commit elder abuse are family members or trusted others. Before we discuss the various types of elder abuse in detail, it's important to understand the dynamics of elder abuse. In cases involving perpetrators who are close to an older adult, there are often established dysfunctional and violent dynamics that have existed throughout the relationship that may increase in severity as the older adult becomes more vulnerable and dependent. So what is elder abuse? Elder abuse typically does not refer to an isolated event, but in a sequence of actions, failure to act that causes harm to an older adult. Elder abuse often leads to a decline in functional abilities, which can contribute to dependency, social isolation, a sense of helplessness, and a cycle of increasing stress and psychological decline. And compared to individuals of the same age, medical and social circumstances, older adults who have been abused are 3 times more likely to die within 3 years than an older adult who hasn't been maltreated. Next, we're going to talk about some of the risk factors for abuse. Elder abuse affects individuals of all genders, racial, ethnic, religious, and socioeconomic backgrounds. There's not a single profile for victims of elder abuse or their abusers. This slide shares some of the factors that predict and increase risk of elder abuse. In addition to maladaptive behavior and interpersonal relationships, caregiver stress and the financial burdens frequently associated with caregiving oftentimes contribute to elder abuse. It's important to keep in mind that stress increases the potential for abuse. This is a hot topic in the field of elder abuse currently, as there are varying perspectives regarding the ability to accurately identify risk factors. And it is widely accepted that social isolation is the most prevalent and common factor in elder abuse cases. Some of the factors that might affect a survivor's willingness to report abuse. They're dependent on their abuser. The abuser may be the only person who provides care for the older adult. In the survivor's mind, the person who's abusing them may be the only thing that's standing between themselves and a nursing home. The survivor may not know who to tell or where to go for help, and they may feel embarrassed or ashamed that the person that's hurting and abusing them is their own child or grandchild. To continue on some of the factors, when a person that's abusing is the survivor's child or grandchild, in most circumstances, it's a parent's inclination to protect their child at times even over their own personal safety. The feelings of shame and guilt that a person who is hurting you, if the person who's hurting you is your own child that you've raised, the survivor may not be willing to jeopardize the relationship that they have with their child or grandchild. Even though it isn't an ideal situation, at the very least, they still have that child or grandchild in their lives. And it may just be a situation where manipulation is keeping the survivor from reporting, using the emotions of the love the parent has for the child to keep them quiet and in line. Next, I'm going to talk a little bit about capacity. It's important to note that a person's capacity, their mental acuity, memory, and decision-making ability may impact their ability to report financial abuse or financial exploitation. The spectrum of capacity ranges, and deficits in capacity are often not inclusive to just a certain amount. And questions of capacity will often be present in cases of alleged elder abuse. Another thing about capacity is that capacity is fluid. It fluctuates as an older adult, may experience good days and bad days, lucid intervals, and times of confusion or disorientation. Medications, vitamin deficiencies, or illnesses can affect capacity. Some illnesses, like a urinary tract infection, can cause an older adult to have a rapid and serious decline in cognitive ability. But as soon as the infection is cleared up from the system, the person can go back to their normal or their baseline. Sundowner syndrome, where an individual seems clear and rational early in the day, but before nightfall, they become upset, agitated, fearful, disillusioned, or sad. As well as, it's also important to note that the spectrum of capacity ranges and deficits in capacity. For this population, the terms capacity and dementia seem to be used interchangeably. It's also important to understand that capacity and dementia may be interrelated, but the presence of dementia does not necessarily mean that an individual lacks capacity, and vice versa. And diminished capacity does not necessarily stem from dementia. Next, I want to just go over the types of elder abuse. There are several types. I'm going to go into a little more detail on them in a moment. Physical abuse, financial exploitation, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, and neglect. First, we're going to talk about physical abuse, which is the non-accidental use of force that results in bodily injury, pain, or impairment. Physical abuse includes, but isn't limited to, slapping, burning, cutting, bruising, or improperly restraining. Injuries sustained by an older individual can have much more serious consequences than a similar injury that's imposed on a younger person. For instance, physical abuse can result in nursing home placement, permanent disability, or death. Some of the warning signs of physical abuse, that physical abuse is being endured: the older adult has suspicious, frequent, and unexplainable injuries, bruising that is not consistent with a fall, fractures that are not consistent with a fall or a stumble. Many times a fracture to the ulna, where it looks like they're actually trying to protect themselves. Refusal of a caregiver to allow the older adult to speak for themselves. Maybe a caregiver answers for them or won't allow them to be interviewed alone. Next is sexual abuse, which is contact with a person without their consent, including forced sexual contact, forcing sex with a third party, or inappropriate touching during routine care. It's important to note that the idea of sexual abuse of older adults can be difficult to compute. Thus, it increases the likelihood that it would be ignored or wouldn't be recognized at all. Some of the warning signs that sexual abuse is occurring: sexually transmitted diseases, bruising, the older adult begins to shy away from being touched, or they suddenly become embarrassed or shameful with routine care. Next, emotional abuse, which is the willful infliction of mental or emotional anguish by threat, humiliation, intimidation, or isolation. Emotional abuse can include, but isn't limited to, frightening or intimidating an adult, speaking to or treating a person in a way that causes emotional pain or distress. This can be verbal or nonverbal and can take the form of yelling, threatening, ridiculing, ignoring, or isolating the older adult. Some of the warning signs that emotional abuse is occurring: there may be a drastic and unexplained change in the older adult. They're not as alert. They begin to withdraw from certain activities and tasks that they once enjoyed. Oftentimes, this behavior isn't easily explained, or that simply the caregiver is overbearing, controlling, and answering for the older adult and won't allow them to spend time with family or friends without themselves being present. The last section I'm going to cover today is about neglect. Neglect is a form of mistreatment by individuals resulting from inadequate attention, especially through carelessness or disregard for the other's needs. Active neglect is willful and intentional deprivation of food, water, clean clothing or bedding, eyeglasses, dentures, or health-related services. Passive neglect is the non-intentional denial of food, water, health-related services because of inadequate caregiver knowledge, infirmity, or disputing the value of prescribed services. In these cases, many times the caregiver may be trying their very best, but just falling short. And last, which we see quite frequently, is self-neglect, which is in older adults' inability to provide essential food, clothing, shelter, or medical care, obtaining goods and services necessary to maintain physical health, mental health, or emotional health, their well-being and general safety, or managing their financial affairs by themselves. And living in a hoarding situation would fall under self-neglect, as well as not taking prescribed medications, things of that nature. Some of the warning signs that neglect may be occurring: an extreme lack of electricity in the home or extreme filth, sudden inability to meet essential physical, psychological, or social needs, which threaten their health or safety and their general well-being. Maybe the older adult disappears from contact with neighbors, friends, or family. They appear hungry or malnourished or have a sudden decrease in weight. They're appearing disoriented or confused, or suddenly appearing disheveled or wearing soiled clothing, or before they prided themselves on the way that they looked. The failing by caregivers to arrive to scheduled appointments or disappearing from an appointment without notice, expressing feelings of hopelessness, worthlessness, or insignificant, failing to take prescribed medications or nutritional supplements, blaming themselves for problems that are arising with their family member or caregiver, and living in squalor or hazardous conditions, hoarding, or cluttering. Last is financial exploitation, which Gabrielle is going to talk about next.
So financial exploitation is defined as the unauthorized use of an individual's funds or property by another person or people. When other forms of abuse are occurring, it's likely that financial abuse is also occurring. For every one case of financial abuse reported, 44 go unidentified and unreported. Financial abuse can occur at the hands of either trusted individuals like caregivers, family and friends, or by strangers, although oftentimes we see it happening by trusted individuals, family, friends, caregivers, those close to the older adult. Nationally, financial exploitation accounts for 30% of all founded adult protective service reports. Some of the warning signs of financial exploitation that we see most frequently are if the suspected abuser or caregiver has total control over the finances and the older adult is unsure of what's happening with their money. They often ask, where is my money? How is it being spent? They just don't have that same access that they used to, but that suspected abuser or caregiver suddenly has all that control. We also see a lot of unpaid bills, especially if that older adult's in a care facility and that bill is no longer being paid. That's a huge red flag. Significant withdrawals from accounts, especially if that was not something that happened previous to that suspected abuser coming into the picture. Unnecessary purchase of goods, services, subscriptions, and changes in that suspected abuser's purchasing habits. If before the suspected abuser got a hold of the older adult's money, they weren't making these purchases or they weren't living a certain lifestyle, and now they are, that can be a really large red flag. The impact of financial abuse, financial exploitation is the most prevalent form of elder abuse, and it costs older adults billions of dollars annually. Financial exploitation can be devastating to older adults. Unlike younger individuals who are often able to recoup back any income lost because they have that income earning potential forward, older adults can't recoup those lost assets through employment, and oftentimes they become reliant on government safety net programs. Older adults are often unable to recoup losses to their savings in retirement, And this impacts long-term care planning, retirement, and health outcomes. 1 in 20 seniors indicate that over the past year, they have experienced some form of alleged financial exploitation, which means that it's a much larger problem than most people know about. As a direct result of exploitation, 10% of financial abuse victims will require Medicaid. This also becomes a problem if there's financial exploitation in the picture. Medicaid may be harder to apply for. There's uncompensated transfer penalties. The application may take longer to be approved. Not impossible, but just a barrier to them getting that Medicaid. Survivors of financial exploitation suffer more than solely monetary losses, loss of trust in others, even programs and services that are set up to help them recover after financial losses. Older adults who have been victims of financial exploitation are less likely to allow those individuals and those agencies to help them because they're just trustful for good reason. Loss of security. Perhaps that older adult had a retirement plan, a pension, they felt comfortable and stable. Now that feeling of knowing your financial plan was there and taken care of is gone. Feeling of shame or guilt, anger, self-doubt. Often they're feeling like, how could they let this happen? Maybe it was their fault or they deserved it, especially when the individual who took advantage was close to them. With lack of resources comes the need to transition from options like in-home services or the ability to stay in their home longer that they might have been able to afford to institutionalized settings like hospitals, assisted living facilities, and nursing homes. Folks that feel shame, self-doubt, and are caught in this vicious cycle don't report, or they minimize the effect. When they're in these situations without help, they are at risk for worse health outcomes. Types of financial exploitation include scams or financial exploitation by criminal organizations, and financial exploitation by trusted individuals, such as a power of attorney. Scams are perpetrated by groups of people who target older adults. Older adults are targeted because of the greater likelihood that they're isolated and the greater likelihood of diminished capacity. These scams can result in devastating losses for older adults and the inability to recoup them. For more information on scams and scam prevention, head over to our YouTube channel and watch our presentation on scam prevention. Financial exploitation by trusted individuals. This is what we in our office, in our elder abuse unit, see most often. Possible means of financial abuse occur by power of attorney, Social Security rep payee, wills, joint accounts, and theft. So power of attorney, this can happen by the individual becoming power of attorney agent, or they were already power of attorney agent and they started taking money as they weren't supposed to. If an individual is named Social Security rep payee, the intended purpose is to put the Social Security money into an account and manage and pay all the bills. Oftentimes, this is where you'll see bills going unpaid because the money is being spent elsewhere. Becoming joint account holder under the guise of helping the older adult, saying, I'll help you with online banking, you're not as mobile, I'll go to the bank for you. But ultimately, that person, that suspected abuser, becomes a holder of that account, an owner, and it's very hard to get them off or stop access to that account because they too own that account. And then, of course, we have just theft, the unauthorized use of debit cards because they take the older adult's debit card, credit card, goods, cash, and they use it as they weren't intended or weren't supposed to. So what is a power of attorney? A power of attorney is something that's not understood easily. A power of attorney is a legal document through which a principal authorizes an agent to act on the principal's behalf. A principal is a person who authorizes another person to act on their behalf, and the agent is the person who acts on that principal's behalf. So a durable power of attorney is what you'll see most often It's valid even if the principal loses legal capacity. This makes the durable power of attorney a useful tool for people who want to plan for the possibility of incapacity down the road. A durable power of attorney document are used to allow an agent to act on behalf of an incapacitated principal. They're usually written very broadly, and they can give the agent a lot of authority for a lot of transactions, which can be a good thing in terms of long-term planning. A statutory gift rider is an additional document that's added on to the power of attorney document, so it's a rider, that if executed gives the agent additional gifting powers. If it's not executed, the current statutory power of attorney form only allows gifts to be made up to $500 in one calendar year. Gifting sounds like it means birthday gifts and Christmas gifts. And while it does mean those things, it also means things like changing the beneficiary on an insurance policy, transferring property for less than fair market value. And some of these powers can be really important in terms of long-term care planning and things that need to happen when the principal loses capacity. An agent has a fiduciary relationship to the principal. This means that the agent's required to act in a trustworthy manner. They are required to act at the principal's direction or in their best interest. They were required to keep records of transactions, disbursements, and receipts. And they were required to keep the principal's property separate and distinct from their own property. There's a standard of care. It's that of a prudent person dealing with the property of another. And all of this is codified in the general obligations law in New York State. So it's statutory and it's in the law itself. So power of attorney abuse can happen both at the creation of the power of attorney and while utilizing the power of attorney. If we're talking about creating the power of attorney, it's always advisable that this be done by and with an attorney and with counsel. However, power of attorney forms can be found on the internet. So sometimes we'll see that these are signed and notarized and the principal or the older adult lacked capacity to do so. Undue influence is the misuse of one's role and power to exploit the trust of another person. So undue influence itself does not constitute elder abuse, but it's a means by which elder abuse may be carried out through manipulation and coercive behaviors. When undue influence is at play, elder abuse victims seem to agree to acts or omissions that lead them to their own loss of property and independence. Warning signs of undue influence may be that the abuser is increasing the older adult's dependence on him or her, manipulation of the older adult's vulnerabilities, victims being unable to explain their reasonings for their decisions, and isolation of the older adult by the abuser. So then when it comes to utilizing the POA and abuse that can happen in that form, we have transactions that exceed the intended authority. Sometimes we see this when the principal did have capacity and they gave maybe a looser direction. An agent will take that and go beyond what the initial direction or intent was. Or if at some point the principal lacks capacity, they'll keep using the power of attorney for transactions that were clearly no longer in the principal's best interest. Transactions conducted for self-dealing. This is pretty obvious. The power of attorney document is not meant for the agent to use whatever money or transactions they have access to for their own benefit. Transactions contravening principal's expectations. Sometimes we see this where the principal or the older adult thought that they would have a say, which they actually absolutely should. These are their finances, their matters. They should be the ones behind the steering wheel at all times. But ultimately, the agent will take over and kind of drive the car. So that'll be one form of power of attorney abuse that occurs. So here we have some scenarios and some questions you should ask if you see these things start to occur or some suspicious things start to occur. So the first scenario, older adult always pays the bills on time, but is now behind. Habits are extremely telling. If an older adult went their whole life paying bills on time, is fairly frugal, didn't withdraw a lot of money, and out of ordinary purchases or expenses should be fairly easy to spot. The questions you want to ask are where the money's going. Are there any new debts or expenses that are taking priority? With a power of attorney, they shouldn't be going anywhere but where the principal directs or what is in their best interest. Again, going back to that standard of care, what is prudent for that agent to be doing with this person's property? Scenario 2, older adult cannot pay for essential needs such as housing or food. Unfortunately, we do see this often. The older adult should have the income they need to pay for these things, and then for some reason they don't. These things can't be paid for. We see in the bank statements that they don't have that balance needed. The best question to ask is, where's that money going and who's controlling it? Who is taking the money out, and where are those transactions going to instead? The third scenario is someone other than the older adult speaking on their behalf. Something that we prioritize is we always want to speak to the older adult in private or alone. This gives them the chance to not be under the influence of any potential bad actors. It might take a couple meetings or a couple phone calls alone for them to actually say what's going on, but it's important to really maintain those boundaries, that they feel that they are comfortable to speak to someone outside of the influence of anyone that may be perpetrating abuse. So we also ask ourselves, who is the suspected abuser to the older adult? What role do they play? What relationship do they have? Are they new? Are they not new? But what's the dynamic? And are there other friends and family involved, and what are their roles? So it's important to kind of look at the big picture of what's going on around the older adult who may be a victim of financial abuse, and really getting to the bottom of it, but also understanding what that older adult's directions and wishes are. So the last slide is solutions, strengthening systems. The best way to combat elder abuse is we want to decrease isolation for older adults and increase their accessibility to programs and systems that are set up for them. So we have a little video here for you that can explain it a lot better than I can. So we're going to go ahead and play it. And hopefully it'll work, because I'm not the most.
A just society works to make sure everyone is free from the threat of abuse at every stage of life. To live up to our ideal of justice for all, we need to work to address the social issue of elder abuse. It's important to understand what creates the risk of experiencing abuse or neglect as we age. A strong and just society is like a structure, supported by many beams. We need strong beams that are frequently maintained. You can think of these beams as the policies and programs that reinforce the relationships and resources needed for health, happiness,
Gabe,
and safety.
you need to change the shared screen so that we can see the video.
The structure is weaker and may not meet our.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. We can hear the sound, but we can't
Okay.
see the video.
Technical difficulties. Hold on one moment. Let's see. There we go. We'll start over.
Yep, perfect.
Perfect. Sorry about that, folks.
A just society works to make sure everyone is free from the threat of abuse at every stage of life. To live up to our ideal of justice for all, we need to work to address the social issue of elder abuse. It's important to understand what creates the risk of experiencing abuse or neglect as we age. A strong and just society is like a structure, supported by many beams. We need strong beams that are frequently maintained. You can think of these beams as the policies and programs that reinforce the relationships and resources needed for health, happiness, and safety. When those support beams are missing or not maintained, the structure is weaker and may not meet our expectations that people are able to live free from maltreatment. The first and most important step to prevent elder abuse is to reduce social isolation. George, age 77, reminds us why this is important. George spends most of his time at home alone since his wife died. His daughter lives too far away to visit regularly, and his neighborhood lacks reliable public transit and many age-friendly civic spaces. Fewer social interactions mean fewer opportunities for walking, talking, and laughing. And with these normal, healthy experiences missing, George's physical, cognitive, and emotional health have gotten worse. His daughter does not know what she can do or where she can turn for help. Without the structure of support, it's easy to see how if George encountered an unsafe situation, the problem might go unnoticed. George's story of social isolation is not uncommon. With millions of our fellow Americans living in similar situations, it's fair to say that our nation's social structure needs repair. Just as one beam alone can't support a building, individuals and family members alone can't single-handedly manage the problem of social isolation and the corresponding risk of maltreatment. The good news is that there are many ways to strengthen our social support through policies, services, and programs that keep us integrated in our communities as we age. We can design and equip community centers to work as intergenerational spaces that allow older people to build relationships and participate in the work, play, and life of our neighborhoods. We can think about the role of transportation and reducing social isolation and adjust systems so that we can all continue to move throughout our communities as we age. We can figure out new and better ways to arrange and coordinate the teams, agencies, and programs that specifically work with older people. We can develop programs to educate families and professionals who work with older adults to understand the importance of preventing isolation, how to spot the warning signs of maltreatment, and what to do to address abuse or neglect. By doing all we can to strengthen the social support structure, we can reduce social isolation, protect communities and families against elder abuse, and build a nation that lives up to our promise of justice for all. Learn more and see how you can get involved in preventing elder abuse and promoting greater justice for older people at ncea.
All right, so that just explained a little bit about how the systems are set up to better combat elder abuse and how everything works together. So I'll go back to our slide real quick. So our last slide is just if anybody has any questions for us. I guess I can, well, here, let's see if there's anything in the chat. And we'll see if anyone has any questions. And also, for referral information or general questions about elder abuse and financial exploitation, you can contact the Center for Elder Law and Justice. Our number is on the screen. It's 716-853-3087. That's our main line. Or for limited legal advice, you can contact an attorney at our Senior Legal Advice Helpline. That number is up on the screen too, or you can email and someone will get back to you about 24 hours. So any questions, just let us know through chat.
Gabe,
Yep.
there's one question from Anne who has called into the meeting. She says, what are the most prevalent cause of the cases that come to our office?
So I would say we definitely we see a lot of financial exploitation, and I would say that we do see a lot of, well, we do get a lot of different varied cases, but I will say we do see a lot of power of attorney exploitation. So someone that was appointed as power of attorney agent and then started to use the power of attorney agent inappropriately, started to use that power of attorney authority inappropriately. and the older adult didn't know where their money was going or how it was, being spent. We also see a lot of scams. I have the chat open. In such cases, who brings the case to you?
A lot of our cases come from Adult Protective Services. Sometimes another of the older adults' children or a friend that thinks something suspicious is going on. We get direct referrals from banks that maybe someone's coming in to the bank on a regular, frequent basis and taking out cash, or sending large amounts of money in the mail to strangers in other cities or states.
Yeah, absolutely.
Gabe, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, I was just gonna say another big, not a big portion of the cases we get, but something we see is cases where a family member is living in the home of the older adult and won't leave, and then perpetrating these abusive behaviors like financial abuse or physical abuse, emotional abuse, and they won't leave. So they're in the home of the older adult. So we bring eviction actions, which is a little hard right now due to COVID, but that's another portion of the cases we see. So I see, Sheena, you put from Facebook. Besides adult services for reporting abuse, can it be directly reported to the police? Absolutely. Oh, go ahead.
No, we do get in law enforcement. A lot of times will refer cases to us because someone will call the police, whether it be a family member, neighbor, again, as well as Adult Protective Services makes a law enforcement referral sometimes before our agency is even involved.
From Facebook, are those numbers available to all of New York or just the counties that CellJ serves? The main line for CellJ, I mean, if for a case to come to CellJ, it's just the county that CellJ serves, but our senior legal advice helpline is available to all of New York. So because an attorney is answering the helpline and we're licensed to practice in the state of New York, we can help with legal questions within the state. So please call in with a question to our helpline. So I think that's it for right now, all the questions. Awesome. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you for listening to our presentation. I think that I'll stop sharing. Hi.
Hi, Anne.